are continuing a series called Thoughts of an Inmate. This is a series on the book of Philippians. And the reason we're calling this because Paul was in prison when he wrote this letter called the book, now we call the book of Philippians. I want to start off with a story of something that happened in the year 2000. Now, some of you guys have heard me tell this story before, but if you're like me, I can't remember what happened yesterday or the day before, so I'm going to tell you a story that I probably told you guys like a few years ago. In the year 2000, I was in college. There was this missions conference that was happening in the University of Illinois Champaign called Urbana. And it's something that this organization called InterVarsity holds every 4 years. And so the church I was a part of at the time said, hey, let's get a bunch of young adults. I was one of them. Let's go to this missions conference. Never been to Illinois before in my life. And in the middle, it's it's from the December 27th to the 31st. So it's like snowing sideways, that kind of condition. And I went with a lot of my peers. That was our plan. We got plane tickets. We got bus rides all set up before we went. But the problem is I got in a car accident the day before we left on this trip. And because of that, I couldn't go on the day that I was supposed to go. Everybody else met up at LAX, and they got on the plane. They flew over, and when they got there, there was a shuttle waiting for them. They got on that shuttle, and they got their bags. They went to the university. They found dorm rooms there. They got to stay. They had a great experience. Me, on the other hand, I said, I have to deal with some insurance things. I don't know if my neck is kind of, hurting. I don't know. So it was a pretty bad accident. I was coming off the freeway by UCLA, and a car hit me, and my car spun back onto the off-ramp. It was, really bad. My parents' car was totally totaled. Yeah, so... But this is what happened, guys. Okay, so the reason I was driving was because I was getting ready for church. I was making some videos for church, and I had to go back to my apartment by UCLA to get some equipment. So I was doing things for the Lord, okay? And then I got in this car accident. And then in this car accident, hey everybody. Everybody just poured right in. So I remember thinking okay, sorry guys, I can't be there. I won't be on the flight with you guys. I know about the ticket. And so I called around, and I was trying to see if I could move my flight to the next day, and they were able to do that, so I was so happy I could do that. So I flew up on the 28th instead of 27th. Everybody else flew on the 27th. I flew up on the 28th. I was on the plane by myself. I was so excited to be on the plane with my peers, but I'm sitting next to a stranger now. And then we landed, and it was a late flight. I got into O'Hare, I think that was the airport. I got in probably close to 11 or 12, midnight. And by the time I got there, I realized I don't have a bus. I don't have a shuttle. And I don't even know the address. Because, when you sign up for a shuttle, you just say, will this take me to the conference? They're like, yeah, right? But I'm in the airport, and I realized when I say, hey, do you guys know which of these buses take me to the conference? No one knows what conference I'm talking about. So I'm going around asking people, there's this Christian conference. It's a big deal. There's thousands of students there. They're like, we have no idea. And the shady dude, he wasn't shady in hindsight, but at the time he kind of, came up to me and said, I think my bus will take you there. And I'm like, well, what are my options, right? And by the way, I'd never been in Illinois before, like I said before, so I didn't know that winter was that cold over there. I had my sweater and my jacket on, and I thought that was warm enough. Oh boy, that was not enough. So, and I'm like, okay, well, how much is it? And I'm like, how much you got? And when they ask you that question, you're like, oh, right. But I'm like, I have no other choice. So I said, I got $50 in my pocket. By the way, $50 back then was a lot more, right? And he's like, that's, you know what? What a coincidence. This must be the Lord, because $50 is what's going to take you from here to there. So I said, okay, sure. So I paid the dude, and I got in the bus. It's one of those small buses, right? I sit down, and there's it's dark inside because it's late at night. There's a person in the back seat that's already sleeping and snoring, and so I sit in the very front, behind the bus driver. And we're driving, and my watch goes off, and it says it's December 29th, which is my birthday. And I'm like, oh, happy birthday to me, right? So we're on this bus, and then I start falling asleep, and all of a sudden, it gets cold. So I wake up, and I'm like, we're still on the freeway, and the bus driver's window is down. And I'm like, and I said, sir, it's really cold back here. He's like, sorry, I'm falling asleep, so that's why this. I'm like, this is so unprofessional. And so I thought, oh my gosh, when you're in that situation, you already see the headlines in your head, Asian American male missing from Los Angeles on his birthday, or. And So I'm imagining all these things, all the bad things that could happen is happening right now. And as I'm starting to fall asleep again, hypothermia, I don't know, but I'm falling asleep. And when I wake up, like the bus is not moving anymore. It's in a parking lot. And so I'm like, wait a minute, and look back, and the guy's still sleeping. So I'm like, wait a minute. So the passengers are still here, but the bus driver's missing. It's like, what happened? Like, are we here? And I'm looking outside the window, and I see a 7-Eleven in front of me. And then a few minutes later, the guy comes running back in, the driver. I'm like, okay, the driver's still here. Phew. Right? And he says, sorry, I got lost. I need directions. This is before the iPhone, right? Like, there's no way of knowing, right? And I don't even know where the destination is. So he starts up the car again, the bus again, and then we drive off again, and I'm starting to really, really worry. And then eventually, we get to this place that looks like a campus. I've never seen the campus before. And then he stops, he opens the door, and he says, I think this is your stop. Okay, right? So what am I supposed to argue with this guy? Like, I can't say no, it's not, because I don't know what it's supposed to look like. I don't have a GPS. So I take my bag, I get out, and I forgot how cold it was. It was really cold. And I step outside, and I look back, and I said, are you sure this is? And even before I finish the sentence, whoosh, and he just takes off. I'm like, oh, man. Whatever the situation is, I'm stranded here. So I'm walking around, and, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning now. Oh, boy. Where'd you find this picture? Oh, you did? Yeah, so this is me back then. Hey, there's my wife.
That looks the same. Where's your plaid shirt?
Oh, that was before my plaid days. There's Bethany. Hey, Kevin. Anyways, I don't even know who that is. That's Sean? Inoue? Oh, wow. Oh, that's Nori sleeping. Anyways, where was I in the story? Oh, yeah. So I'm in the middle of, I think it's a campus. Everything's like dark except for lamp lights or street lights or whatever. And I'm walking around and I'm like, I need a place to stay. I'm in the middle of campus of whatever university. I don't know what this place is. And then I see a light on in one of the buildings. And so I go up to the building, I pound on it's like a glass door, I pound on the door, and no answer. So I'm like, okay, I gotta keep walking. I keep walking, and I see a bus bench. So I sit down, and I thought, sun's gonna probably rise in about 4 hours, I'll just spend the night here. So I put my bag right there, and I sit down, and I'm just like sitting there like, oh, this is cold. And then I start dozing off, which is probably not a good idea. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I got to make sure my bag is still there. I look over, and it's gone. And I'm like, what happened to my bag? And then I realized, oh, no, it's still there. It's just under a pile of snow now. And that's when I realized, again, that, okay, so if I spend the night here, I'm going to be a snowman by tomorrow morning. So I got to keep walking. So I kept on walking. And right when I started praying, what else could happen that could just ruin my birthday? All of a sudden, I see red and blue lights, pew, 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 right behind me. And I'm like, oh, great. And he said, we got a call from a janitor of this school. I guess when I pounded on that door, it was like the janitor saying, there's a weirdo outside, right? And we're going to take you into the station. I'm like, oh. So you know how like police cars in the back, there's no cushion? I thought, at least I could sit somewhere soft. No. So I'm like sitting in the back of this patrol car. And then I thought, well, at least I'm warm now. Like, this is a silver lining. I'm warm. And I could probably explain this is the situation. He might not believe me, but you're right. And as I'm sitting there thinking, finally things are going to start turning out for the best, the radio goes off. We're looking for an Asian male about 5'8", 5'9", who's wearing a gray jacket. I'm like, oh man, that's me. And I'm like, oh no. And apparently the janitor did call and said that there was a man walking around. So I explained my situation, and they said, okay, well, yes, you're in the right place. I'm like, hallelujah. And so we're going to drop you off at the nearest dorm because that's where all the students are staying. There's a lot of dorms, but that's one of the dorms where the students are staying. So they drop me off there. I go in, and this is like 5 a.m. now. And the person checks me in. It's like, this isn't your room that we assigned for you, but you could stay here until tomorrow morning when the registration opens. You could go there and get your actual room. So I go into the room. I put my bag down on this empty dorm room. And I look at my watch and I realize, if I sleep now, I'm not going to wake up in time for registration. Might as well stay up another hour or two rather than fall asleep and not wake up for the next 5 hours. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to stay up. So I put my bag down, I leave the room, and I paced around the campus inside, until it was time for registration. So I went up to the registration desk, and they gave me my room. So I went back to the dorm room to get my stuff, and my bag's gone because they said we gave the room to somebody else. So where's my bag? It's like, well, we'll have it to your other room by the time you get there. So they gave me the other room, so I went there. My bag's not there yet. As a matter of fact, my bag doesn't show up until the last day of this. So I'm wearing the same dirty clothes, wet clothes, sleeping in them also. And because I was trying to deal with them, trying to get my bag back, I couldn't go to any of the sessions, the breakout sessions. So why am I even here, right? And so the day comes where we're flying back. I'm with my friends now. Oh, by the way, the day that I get there, the main speaker says, I just feel the Lord telling us that we're supposed to fast today. And I'm like, I haven't eaten in 36 hours. Happy birthday. Yeah, thank you. And so December 31st comes. By the way, the sessions were great, the ones I could attend. Last day comes, we all go to the airport together, and we're checking in, and they're like, we don't have your name in the system. Because you didn't fly out on the day that you're supposed to fly out, we thought you weren't here, so we canceled your flight back. So I'm like, I'm stuck here for New Year's Eve? They're like, no, we could find something for you. They found we have a spot on the next flight. And, it's like, stand back, turn around. It's like, I guess, yeah, sure, we'll put you in first class. I'm like, yes! It turns out LA was pouring that day. First flight came in with my bag, by the way. It landed, and my flight's right behind, and they're like, we can't land, so we're circling. And I'm like, great. And now it's getting late. It's getting really late. And by the time I land, my parents are already in bed, so I had to walk home from LAX. Yeah, so Christmas, car accident. Birthday, yeah. New Year's, blah. It's like just bad. Okay. So this made me think of this question, right? I know, this has a point. Next slide. Why do bad things happen to good people? Right? Because, I don't know if you guys agree, but I thought I was a pretty good person. And, and I was doing this for Jesus, right? So why would he allow this to happen? And the secondary question is, well, and what should we do when bad things happen to us? Right? Bad things happen to good people all the time. And we always look to God and say, why? Why? I don't think this is right. Well, today we're going to be looking at a passage because we're in a series. Yeah, we're doing the sermon series still. We're looking through the book of Philippians chapter 1. Today we're looking through 18-26. We're just looking at 9 verses today. And if you guys remember the story of Paul, who wrote this letter he wrote it from prison, okay? And when he wrote this from prison, he was in a situation where they were not feeding him. He was surrounded by all these stones, making the room really cold, which is why later in the book of one of the letters he writes to his friend Timothy, he says, please bring a cloak because I'm cold in here, right? It was completely pitch dark black except for this little hole in the ceiling where the light would come in if it was noon, if the sun was right above him. Otherwise, it's just dark in there, right? He was living under the worst conditions. And for some reason, in this letter, he says, hey, guys, I'm actually kind of okay being here. It's like, really? Are you just saying that because you want to encourage the people that are going to read your letter? It's like, no, I'm really happy because there are some silver linings that I found in this situation. And sure, you feel good about it now, but maybe tomorrow after you send out the letter, you're not going to feel so good. It's like, no, I'm feeling really good. I think whatever God wants my life to count for is actually happening. And that's what we talked about last week. And we're going to continue from verse 18, and today we're going to be looking at some ancient Jewish literary devices that we might not be familiar with. So let's take a look. He says this, yes, and I will continue to rejoice. I'm happy now, and I will continue to be happy, for I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. Turn out for my deliverance. What does that mean? I mean, there's a lot of scholars out there who look at this and say, oh, he knows that he's going to be released from jail soon. Right? There's no evidence in the letter that says that. But for those scholars who are able to look at this and understand Jewish literature, because remember, Paul was a Jewish rabbi. He was a Pharisee. He knows the Old Testament forwards and backwards. And when he writes, even though he wrote it in Greek, he's still thinking like a Jewish person, okay? In Jewish literature, there is this literary device called a remez. R-E-M-E-Z, a remez. ancient Jewish literature used this thing called a remez, where you refer to Old Testament passages by referring to certain words. So if I were to say, like, in the beginning, it's referring to Genesis chapter 1, but not just that, but it's also referring to the theme and the lesson you learn from that. So they're not just referring to one specific word or verse of the Old Testament. You're referring to the whole idea of that section of the scriptures. So when Paul says, this will all turn out for my deliverance, here we go, turn out for my deliverance, he's actually referring to a specific part of the Old Testament, namely Job chapter 13, verse 16. Of course, you guys have read Job chapter 13, 16 before, right? No? Okay. You're like, of course we have, Kotz. Okay. So in order to understand Job chapter 13, verse 16, you have to understand the whole book of Job, which has 40 plus chapters, which will take a long time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a quick summary of the book of Job. Okay, it's a very long one. It's mostly like, there's like 2 or 3 chapters of plot, and the rest is just poetry. So there isn't much for me to say. But as it turns out, when Paul wrote this letter and wrote, this is going to be for my deliverance, he was referring to this book, the entire book, because the theme of the book was this: why do bad things happen to good people? Right? So this is Paul, hey, I want to tell you the story about Job. And we'll get to 13, 16 in a second, okay? But here's the story of Job. So let's just say this is Job over here, okay? Now, Job, as it tells us in the first chapter of that book, he says that he was a very rich man. He had a nice family. He had a lot of land, a lot of crops. He had a great status in society. He was very healthy. But in one day, he lost it all. Okay, that's how the story goes. Now, Job and the people who lived there at that time had this understanding of life. And maybe you guys hold on to this too. And there's like a theological term for it. I'm not going to teach you because you'll just get lost in it. Okay. But basically the understanding is this: good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. Today, if you're Asian, you'll say like, oh, bachi, right? Or karma, or I don't know what you would call it. But, if somebody is acting like a jerk over there and something bad happens to him today, you're going to say, you see, you deserve it because you believe that bad things should happen to bad people, right? That's what those people believed back then. In some cases, we believe it today, right? Now, here's the situation of the Job story. Job believes that I am innocent. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm a good person. Therefore, right? He says bad things are supposed to happen to bad people, but in this situation, bad things are happening to good people, like myself, he would say. So he was like, so this here does not compute to him. He's like, wait a minute. I'm a good person, and I know that good things happen to good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. So he comes to this conclusion. The conclusion is this: that God must be unjust. He shakes his fist at God and says, this isn't how the world is supposed to work. So the only conclusion I could come up with is that something's wrong with you. He points his finger at God. Like I said, this is a summary. I'm not going to get into the details here. Because in the next few chapters of the book of Job, we have Job's friends, one by one, come. I'm just going to represent all those friends with this one person here. His friends show up, and each one comes up to him and gives their explanation, a theological reason why these things are happening to Job. But you know how Job started with himself, I'm innocent, therefore it must be God that's the problem? His friends take it the other way. He doesn't start with Job, he starts with God. He says this: God is just. Therefore, in a world where good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, therefore, the problem must be you. You must be bad. You must have done something bad. I mean, Job, we think you're a great guy and all, but we don't know what you're doing in secret, so you must be the bad person in this story. Now, we know from the first chapter of Job that God looks at Job and says that he is a righteous man. So we know this isn't true. So these guys are asking questions about God. Maybe God is like this. Or they ask questions about Job. Maybe Job is like this. In the midst of those conversations, Job speaks up. This is chapter 13. Keep silent. Now, this is funny because a few verses before this, Job is like listening to his friends talk about how bad Job is. And he says, you want to sound like you're wise? When you stop talking, that's when you sound the wisest. Like Job is like, that's why he says, keep silent. It's like, just shut your mouth, right? Keep silent and let me speak. Then let come to me what may. Imagine this courtroom scene where he's standing before God, right? And God is doing what God is supposed to do. Give bad things to bad people, give good things to good people. And as God is looking at Job, he's imagining in his head, okay? Job says, I'm going to make my case to God that I'm a good person. And if he finds me as a flawed and sinful person, then give me what I deserve. Like, I'll take what I deserve, but I just don't feel like I deserve this. That's what he's saying. So then let come to me what may. Why do I put myself in jeopardy and take my life in my hands? Like, I'm so certain that I'm a good person that when I stand before God, if he says, but Job, you're not a good person, then I'll take it. I'll take the punishment that's supposed to come with not being a good person. Then he continues. Though he slay me, though God has been hurting me, he's basically killing me. There's this one scene where he says that his skin starts to break out in boils, and because he's feeling so much pain, he picks up a shard of a broken pot and he starts scraping his skin because he feels like it brings him some comfort. Like, that's the kind of life he's living now. It's like, I don't deserve this, right? And so God's been doing this to me, yet will I hope in him. I will surely defend my ways to his face. I'm going to go up before God. I'm going to look him in the face and say, examine me. If I'm a bad person, sure, I deserve this. Give me what I deserve, but I don't think I deserve this. I think I'm a good person, and I'm going to make my case to him that I am a good person. And then, this is where the famous verse comes in. Indeed, this will turn out for my deliverance. There it is. Paul is quoting this line right here. For no godless person would dare come before him. Like, I'm that certain. I'm doubling down on the fact that I'm a good person. And we know that he's right because we read in Job chapter 1 and 2 that God sees him as a righteous person. When God sees that I'm actually righteous, he's going to say, oh, my bad, let me take all those bad things away from you because you don't deserve this. That's what he's thinking is going to happen here. Now, if we stop the story here, we still won't understand what Paul is referring to because we have to understand the whole book, okay? So, one by one, his friends come up to him and start doing their own theological work, saying like, well, it must be because you're a bad person, right? So the question still remains, why do bad things happen to good people? By the way, Job is a pretty smart guy. At one point when his friends say that you're a bad person, he's like, well, by your logic, that guy that lives down the street, who we all know as a community is a really bad person, how come these things aren't happening to him? If what you're saying is true, it should be happening to him too, but it's not. And they're like, oh, yeah, you're right, Job. Right? So there's this whole thing about like, well, why do bad things happen to good people? And at like halfway, maybe like 2/3 of the way through the story, the question goes unanswered. We don't know why bad things happen to good people. And then all of a sudden, another character jumps into the story, which happens to be God. I'm using this iCloud icon because I don't know how to draw God. Okay. And God looks at Job and he says, you and your friends, you guys have been pointing your finger at me? You've been asking questions to me? Well, now it's my turn to ask you questions, Job. And then he goes into this long list, like 40 plus questions of questions that Job can't answer. Like the first question he asks, or one of the first questions he asks is, where were you when I laid the foundations of this earth? Oh, wait, you weren't around? Oh, sorry, right? Like when lightning and thunder strikes the ground, do they check in with you to ask you where it should go? Like when there's storms of snow, that's what you're doing right now, right? But okay, when there's like hail and snow coming from, like, do you know where I store those things? Do you know what the storehouse is for all that stuff? No? Oh, I didn't, all right. Do you know why the ostrich has wings and it flaps it but doesn't fly? Why do you think I gave it wings? You don't know? Oh, by the way, while we're on the topic of ostriches, when it lays an egg, it goes through a lot of pain, only to find out a few days ago it's trampling around and steps on its own egg. Why do you think they do that? Job's like, I don't know. Like, these are in the book of Job, guys. Like, do you know why the wild goat gives birth at a certain season and not other seasons? You don't know? Oh, okay. Well, I thought you would know, Job, because you're acting like you're God. I'm like, no, you don't know. Okay. And he goes on and on and on, asking all these questions. At the very end of the thing, of the lines of questions, Job sits there and says, oh my goodness, I don't know anything. What God is trying to do in this part of the story is basically say, the world is so nuanced. You're thinking about yourself and your suffering. I keep an eye on everything from wild goats to ostriches to the stars and the lightning. I consider everything. before I look at, like, if you're thinking what you're going through is unfair, that's because your scope is so limited. I take into account the entire universe. And at this point, Job, he's like totally humbled. Like, oh, I guess I don't really have much to say to that. And then Job says this. This is chapter 40. Job answered the Lord, I am unworthy. He realizes that he really doesn't know what's going on in this world, that he has no right to say, I believe that the world works like this, and therefore you made a mistake. Like, you have no right to say that. You don't know how the world is supposed to work. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more. He's thinking back to things he said earlier in the story. Oh man, I can't believe I said that to God. Now I know more about what's going on. I realized what I said back then was so foolish. Like, if there's a video camera recording of that, they'll say, like, I just destroy that, just take it off. Oh, once it's on the internet, it's always there. Okay, well, I hope that no one looks at it. Like, it's one of those things where, like, when I spoke, I probably shouldn't have. And he learns, maybe I should just listen rather than speak, rather than point fingers and accuse other people or even God, right? And then later on this story in chapter 40, God even says, do you want to run the world? According to your philosophy of how the world's supposed to work, let's see how the world would operate if you were in charge. And Job was like, no, the whole world will fall apart if I were to run the world. It's like, exactly. And then chapter 42, Job says this. Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. Right? Let's go on. You ask, who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge? Like, Job is like, God, you're asking, who's the one here who's trying to run the world without really knowing much about how to run the world? Job is like, I remember you asked that question. That was me. Sorry, right? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. Then, you said, listen now, and I will speak. I will question you, and you shall answer me. My ears had heard of you. He said, when I said all those things, it was because I heard rumors about you. I thought I knew who you were. I thought I knew how you operated. I thought I knew who God was. And that's why I said those things. I was basing everything based off of things I heard from other people about you. But now my eyes have seen you. But now I have actually experienced you. And therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. He's like, I was making demands of you because I didn't know you or how you worked. But now that I know you, now that I experienced you, I'll take a step back and accept the life that you've given me. So, remember, the theme of this book is, why do bad things happen to good people? The answer to that is this. We will never understand the complexities of how God runs the world. But, I know we're kind of down because they're like, okay, he didn't answer the question, right? But he learns a different lesson. You see, Job finds peace not because he found answers, because he didn't find answers, right? I know we live in a world where we feel like we have to know why things happen. He says, I still don't know why bad things happen to good people, but I found peace because, well, Job learns to trust God's infinite wisdom. I don't know why bad things happen to good people. It's too way above my brain level to even fathom what goes into account, like what goes through God's brain before he makes this decision on what happens to people. But I've learned that God has his eye on everything. And I know that God is love. And for that reason, even though I might have gone the short end of the stick, I know that the world is better because of him ruling this world. Now, that's the theme of the book of Job. Congratulations, you went through all 40-something chapters of Job in a few minutes. Okay, so let's plug that back into Philippians, right? He says, this will be for my deliverance. What is he saying here? What is Paul trying to say here by quoting the Old Testament, using Remez? This is what he's saying. He's saying, I, like Job, am an innocent person who is suffering evil. Like, I could relate to Job's story. And he is also saying, I am joyful. Like, why am I happy to be in jail? Because, like Job, I learned to trust in God's infinite wisdom. Have you guys noticed that if you look to some of the wisest sayings that you've ever read or you've ever heard, they usually come from people who have suffered a lot? A person who was raised in a rich neighborhood and has no problems in their lives, and they give you a word of wisdom, it sounds very shallow. But when you talk to somebody who survived imprisonment, internment camps, racism, suicide, you listen to them, and you're like, what you just said has so much depth to it. Why? Because they know something that you can't just learn from a book. They've experienced something. And this is what Paul is saying. Like Job, because of my suffering, I have learned something that has brought me peace. And that is the reason why I feel like I have joy while I'm in prison. Now, how do we do this? How did Paul learn to trust God's wisdom in all this? Well, he gives us a clue in the passage we just read, right? He says this. Next slide. He said, your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ. He says, it's because you, the church in Philippi, which this letter is written to, it's because you've been praying for me that I've been able to gain this wisdom. And it's because the Holy Spirit was activated. Like, something is happening that I don't understand, but when you prayed for me, somehow my suffering turned into an important lesson in my life. And that is the reason why I have so much joy. By the way, this is why prayer is so important. This is why the prayer team at Westlight is so important. Now, keep in mind, I'm sure the people in Philippi were praying for Paul's release from prison, which he eventually was. But when he wrote this letter, their prayers did not change the circumstances. It's not like they start praying and then Paul's like, what's happening, guards? What, you're letting me go? Like, that didn't happen. The circumstances didn't change. Prayer sometimes does change circumstances, but in this story, the circumstances didn't change. But you know what did change? It helped Paul see the purpose of his suffering. He says, even though I feel like there's no hope here, I'm able to find trust that me being in prison is actually a good thing. He's realizing that his suffering is somehow connected to a greater good in the world that a normal person wouldn't be able to understand. He's like, I don't know what it is, but I'm just going to trust that, like Job, he learned that God has his eye on everything, and I'm not the main character of this story. And somehow this is all going to work out for the world. Well, let's see how it worked out for Paul. Let's keep reading. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether in life, by life, or by death. What he's saying is this, guys, I have a better perspective of my situation now. What he's saying is this, if I am, next slide, if I'm killed, I guess I'm Christ-like, because Jesus, an innocent man, was killed, right? He suffered for his innocent life. I don't know how that works, but it happened to him. And so if I were to die, and the guards here know that I'm also innocent, they've been hanging out with me this whole time. If I die, and they're like, wait a minute, this person doesn't deserve to die. He's an innocent person. It's like, yeah, but I'm going to die, right? And he's going to die. The guards there are going to be like, wow, is this what Christ is like? That he died for innocent reasons? Like, yeah. Like, there's gain. There's something good that comes out of me dying because I get to die like Christ. But if I live, he's like, I can live like Christ. I could go out there and keep sharing the gospel. I could tell people about love. I could tell people about forgiveness and generosity. I could do all that stuff. So I guess either way, God wins. The purpose of God keeps going forward. And you know the guards who are there watching me all the time? They're Romans, and they believe that Caesar is God. They're going to be like, wait a minute, why are we following Caesar, killing innocent people? We would rather follow Jesus because he forgives people like us. Like, either way, Paul says, God wins. And so Paul says the next line, this is a famous verse that a lot of people memorized. He says, to me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. What does this mean? Like, to live as Christ? He explains the next verse. If I am to go on living in the body, that means if I stay alive, like they let me out of jail eventually, this will mean fruitful labor. I could keep doing what I'm doing. I could go around telling people about Jesus' love. I could tell people about tearing down barriers and walls that creates racism, right? They're like Jews and Gentiles. Like, I could keep bringing them together, right? If they let me go, I'm going to teach the Roman guards about how to forgive one another. I'm going to tell them about how Jesus is the one that is starting this new movement where people are coming back together like the way that God intended them to be. Like, if I'm out there, I get to keep doing this, right? Yet, what shall I do? dying and living. Usually we would say living is better than dying. Paul is genuinely frustrated. Like, I don't know. Should I die or should I live? Not like he has a choice here, but he's like, if I had to choose. Now, the next verse, before getting to the next verse, I want to share with you a little commentary about how the next verse is written, because it's so interesting how Paul writes. This is Dr. Peter T. O'Brien. He's a theologian, a scholar, New Testament scholar from Australia. So that's why he spells the word labor with a U, labor. Okay, at this point, Paul's language becomes somewhat obscure, like his grammar. And the grammar of the passage reflects the conflict of feeling in his mind. He is tossed to and fro between the desire to labor for Christ here on earth and the desire to be united with him in death, right? So at this point, Paul's like, if you were to ask me if I should choose life or death, like, I don't. This is how it looks like in the Greek. He says this, but if to live in the flesh, this to me fruit of work. Like, it's like grammatically bad, you know? What I shall choose, I do not make no. Like, it's like Yoda. It's like, I don't know, right? That's how he's writing this section, because you could see in his writings that he is complete, like he's genuinely like, I don't know what to do, right? Next verse. So it says, I am torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ. Like, if I die, I get to be with Jesus. That's good, because I love him so much. But, which is better by far, I think, but is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. Like, I stay alive. Like, I love Jesus so much, but I love you guys so much. I don't know. Like, what we have in our mind is this. This love Jesus with all my heart and love others with all my heart, right? And you're like, I don't know which to choose. For Paul, they're not two separate things. For Paul, next slide, love Jesus and others with all my heart is one and the same. So when you're asked, do you want to die or live? He's like, my brain's about to explode because I don't know what the difference is. Because Paul learned through Jesus that loving on people is loving God. It's like, I don't know what to do. My brain is about to, right? It's like, and the reason he's able to think this way is because he met God in his suffering. He met God in his suffering, and he's like, and if I'm going to be more like Christ, like I'm supposed to suffer for the world, and if I'm suffering for the world, that means I have to stay alive. Like, I don't know, like he's completely like confused. So he goes on, convinced of this, I know that I will remain. Like, you know what? I think God's going to keep me alive, and I will continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith, so that through my being with you, again, your boasting in Christ, Jesus, will abound on account of me. You know what? I think because I'm going to, if I had to choose, I guess I'll stay alive so that you can be blessed. And through that, I guess I'm loving on God. So, okay, that's how I'm going to do it, right? So, how did Paul arrive at this? Like, anybody would say, I think Paul's missing a few screws in his brain. But it all started with this question, these questions. Why do bad things happen to good people? And what should we do when bad things happen to us? And these are questions that Paul asked. We know that he asked because of the conclusions that he arrived at. And Paul would answer these questions like this. I don't know why bad things happen to good people. And I have no business trying to figure this out. But I trust that this will play a role in God's plan of bringing heaven on earth. We want answers, don't we? We're almost addicted to them. We're always asking, why did this happen to this person? Sometimes the only human thing to do, the only healthy thing to do, the only thing that you could think of doing is to raise our voice, shake our fist at God, and say, I demand an explanation of why this is happening to me. But like Job, what we discover is that through our suffering, if we choose to draw near to God, we find something better than an answer. We find peace. That God has his finger on everything. He knows how everything works. And given the situation of the entire world, he says, I'm sorry, but this is the lot that you're going to be given. And trust me, through this suffering, this is how the world needs to turn out, given the situation we're in right now. We gain wisdom, a type of wisdom that we can't learn through reading books. A wisdom that could only be experienced. And through those experiences, we gain perspective. we see the bigger picture. We understand God just a little bit more. And when we understand God just a little bit more, we're like, you know what? I'll leave it up to you because I just realized how big you are and how little I know. And this is why it's so important to be honest with God. It's okay to be angry with God. It's okay to yell to God and say, this is unfair. I don't think I deserve this. Because being honest with God is the first step to understanding a little more of his place in this universe and our place in this universe. And if I were to go around this room and just say, tell me a story of that time in your life when you just felt like it was unfair. And you'll hear a whole bunch of stories of people saying, yes, I thought it was unfair, but this is how I came to peace with the situation. That we learn who God is and we learn who we are. Amen? All right, let's pray.